It took me far too long to figure out how to flip the camera, but I managed it, you know. I'm a genius. I managed to get it all sorted, and you can read the books up here. I can know which way my arm's going and actually feel like it's all working correctly. And yeah, I mean, and I can feel smarter than I am. That's all that really matters, right? Just as long as I feel smart. Hello Internet, I'm Oliver Worley from Ikarus' workshop, and I wanted to talk about zombies, just because it's been on my mind and bugging me. I mean, they're creatures of the night, the violent animalistic kind of hoarders have so many interesting kind of themes and metaphorical statements that you can get from them, and yet I don't think D&D does it justice, or the way they're handled typically within like most games does the actual concept which a zombie, you know, has. It just doesn't do it justice, and I want to talk about it. I mean, zombies are really iconic in media for essentially being a metaphor for the mindless horde. You know, they've got other tropes that are vital to their kind of demeanor and characterization, but structurally they are the mindless horde, and that's kind of like the main crux of what defines them. And I want to talk about how to make that fit within the D&D environment, as it were. What sort of mechanics and themes to introduce and how to go about doing it to get the best, or in my mind, the best kind of situation. There are certain tropes that fit within the zombie aesthetic, as it were, and since I'm a fan of breaking things down into specific points and then exploring them separately, that's exactly what I've done, because that's whatever, it works. And I've essentially come up with 3 main criteria which needs to be broken down, plus other bits of variety that you can add on or think about when you're constructing a zombie encounter or a zombie setting. But let's tackle the first 3 criteria first. Now, I thought the 3 that fit best are the sense of horror, creating this sense of tension and kind of violence and gruesomeness, along with a sense of tension and yeah, just that sort of stuff for a zombie. I mean, it works within the environment, and I'll kind of break it down later. So let's tackle horror, the idea of them being horrific. In all sorts of media, be it The Last of Us, or World War Z, or XCOM 2, the zombies, the effective zombies, are always gruesome and have some sort of horrific element. They are violent, they are animalistic, in many cases more animalistic than we would typically consider animalistic, you know, and they are mindless, they are brutal, they are essentially they're not things that you'd want to engage with as a normal person, unsurprisingly. And so I came up with a couple of ideas that kind of aid with that concepts. The first most obvious way of creating this sense of horror is through your description, and you want your description to be gruesome and over-exaggerated in many cases. I'm talking and significant. You also want it to be significant. So you present, when they attack, they don't just slam you with their fists. No, they attack you raking with their claws in a frenzy. And when they run, rather than just running towards you, they shamble, shoulders coming first, and their horrible kind of lulling groan coming out from them. Rather than just describing the air as smelling rotten, you describe it as smelling like, you know, an old battle that has consumed itself, you know? You want to provide these descriptions because by taking them over the top and getting them to a really dramatic sense, the players will attribute that dramatic gruesomeness to the zombies, and in turn, the zombies will appear more horrific and gruesome than, you know, than they would otherwise. I mean, this in itself could be enough to just turn a standard encounter into one of real remembrance. People will remember it simply with good descriptions. But obviously the problem with that is it can get overused. On your 5th zombie encounter, you still want them to feel horrific, but you end up describing them in such a horrific manner again that the players lose interest in such a kind of perspective. And so it's useful for introduction and things, but you don't want to overdo it. That said, to bring about this kind of specific nature that the players will want when dealing with these issues, I mean, I think we all know about Matthew Mercer's kind of how do you want to do this rule. When you kill some sort of significant enemy, you give the players the opportunity to describe it. I would say do that with zombies when they kill a zombie, but whatever they describe, you describe back at them, but ramped up to 11. You know, if they describe, you know, a simple kind of efficient manner in which they dispatch the zombie, you describe the efficient manner turning into a gruesome one. You know, everything that surrounds these zombies needs to be gruesome and horrific in a manner to produce this kind of horrible theme that goes with them. Another thing that's vitally important for creating this theme is the environment and the setting. The more foreshadowing or the more eerie the environment, the more effective the encounter will be at the end. I'm talking an old battlefield with no bodies on it at all. You can see arms and weapons and stains of blood, but there's nobody there. That obviously leads to undead. It's so obvious a foreshadow, and yet the idea is there and implanted in the player's mind, and so when it's fulfilled, not only will it be satisfying, but it will not necessarily be less significant, and it won't feel like it's being forced into place. That's, you know, you can also apply by something a bit less obvious, okay? Because sometimes being too obvious takes things away. Sometimes it doesn't, many times it doesn't. Sometimes obviousness is not bad, but in many cases it can be overused. And so other environments like a thick mist or a forest that is too quiet, you know, these sort of things can add an eeriness to the zombies, and when it's finally pulled off and the combat is activated, the tension will be released more significantly, and the players will have to, you know, the players will have kind of like a heightened sense, as it were, when engaging with it. On a mechanic sense, however, when you see a zombie, when you see these horrific creatures and these gruesome encounters, I think it's not that. I don't think it's that difficult to assume that there would be some sort of terrifying element that would, you know, cause people to flee, even if that's not their intent. And so some sort of constitution check when they encounter a certain number of these zombies would be, you know, a very good way of just reinforcing the fact that these things are horrific creatures without having to, you know, redo all of this description and setup each time. A simple constitution saving throw or becoming panicked, I would probably make the effect more significant than frightened, because frightened in D&D is not a very significant effect. It's just disadvantage and you can't close distance. That's bad in some situations, but in others it's fine. Disadvantage is annoying, but oftentimes not the end of the world. And so I would instead have a more significant consequence, which is still related to fear. I created this new condition that I use in my games called the Panicked, and essentially it's very similar to the XCOM Panicked. I take tons of stuff from XCOM because I'm addicted to the way it handles problems. But essentially the condition is when you get panicked, you move randomly, you can attack random targets, you can use certain items, or you might just hide. Any of those certain options will take place and you have no control over them. Instead it's a dice, and it requires a will save to recover. What it does is it means that even in the higher levels, that effect, if it takes place, is still significant, and the players will have to be deciding on how they go about trying dealing with this loss of a party member for however long. And so this sense of horror is really embedded into that with the mechanic. To stop it from getting over the top, you might say this mechanic only triggers when the party is outnumbered 2 to 1, you know, or when the zombies do something significant and horrifying, like some sort of significant event. I've spoken about significant events before, but if you want, check out Dale Kingsmill's video, because they do a really good job about narrative combat. And you might only do such a check on what they refer to as significant events. But yeah, I think all of these items, when combined, will really create a sense of horror that you would not get if any of them were taken separately and individually. And so, just something to think about as you create these themes and concept. The second point is the idea of creating this horde mentality. And I think you can take this in a number of different perspectives to get the idea across. The first point I wanted to think about was in media, zombies typically have one kind of extra heightened sense that they can refer to and they use specifically in an environment, and the other senses tend to be dimmed down, so essentially they're reliant on this single sense. I really like this idea of making zombies dependent on a specific sense, because it means they're predictable, they're easy to manipulate, and yet they're easy to decide on how they're going to act as a DM. Firstly, you've got to make sure that they act animalistically. A stimulus happens and they get attracted to that stimulus. If it's hearing, they hear something and they all swarm to that point to attack whatever's there. Only attacking within sight range once they're very close, and then they rely on their sight or whatever, you know. Or if they rely on smell, they smell something and then they swarm on that. The idea is once a stimulus makes them swarm to a certain point. But the idea of having the sense as the primary defining factor of what the stimulus for these zombies is really interesting, because it allows the players to firstly manipulate the zombies and come up with creative solutions and traps that might protect them in certain environments. If it's hearing, which is a kind of a prominent one within zombie media, but if it's hearing, traps with bells or falling rocks or throwing stones or paper mache on the floor so as that they can walk without making noise, you know. Weird and ingenious solutions to problems like this are brilliant for creating this sort of specific environment. They're easier for you to run as a DM, they're easier for the players to manipulate, but it also makes something specific and individual that kind of rules them out and makes them seem more dependent. The zombies will seem dependent on this, and so the players can manipulate that, and and they can just feel it just makes things cool. I like it. However, to deal with the horde specifically, I think there are a couple of different things you can do to create. And the first thing is, again, the thematic element. When you construct an encounter, okay, there are oftentimes you'll have some predetermined enemies that you're going to bring in. We all know that action economy is key in these sort of environments, and so just bringing in all 30 zombies into an encounter could really mess up even a higher level party, even if they have AoE, simply because of the sheer number that they have. The numbers will outmatch the party regardless of how many fireballs they have stored up. And is an incredible threat to the lower level parties because of the imbalance that exists between the kind of attacks of the party versus the zombies. And yet, if you only send 5 zombies against the party, though the combat might be balanced, even still may be difficult, okay? The players won't have the sense of it being a horde. They'll just see zombies as being individually difficult, which is not what you want. You want the zombies individually to seem weak. And so instead of having all of the zombies there on the battlefield at once, I would suggest having a number of starting zombies, maybe half that of the however big the party is. You've got a party of 5, go for 3, you know, that sort of thing. But every round after combat starts, you bring more in from different directions, and the different directions is key here. If all the zombies come from the same direction, the players will feel that, you know, everything is coming from a single direction because they'd be right, and there's no swarm there, it's just a big wave. So instead, send them in like groups of 2 or 3 from different aspects, and the players will feel from different sides, and the players will feel like they are surrounded. But what this will do is this will create the idea of a swarm that the players can deal with without getting completely overwhelmed within minutes. And so it's just an interesting, or it's just the way that I'd go about doing it, because why not? However, on a more mechanical sense, when dealing with this, I thought to create a horde and make it feel like individually weak, collectively strong, there are 2 ways you can go about this. Having some sort of gang up bonus mechanic where they gain bonuses to hits and damage depending on the amount of zombies adjacent to them. And that's kind of like in a group their strong take. But the individually weak side of that sort of argument is when you cause enough damage to do a killing blow with an attack, that attack is refunded. So, two concepts. The first gang up bonus is quite self-explanatory. The players will seek to break apart the groups to best maximise or to minimise the benefit of that gang up bonus. So not too complex there. But with the mechanic that I call the headshot mechanic, which again I've taken from XCOM 2. But with this headshot mechanic, there's the obvious flaw that it can get out of hand quite quickly. I mean, if your players consistently do more damage with one attack than the zombie have health, they can just chain and cut down 30 in a round. So there are some limitations you want to place on this, or some clever behind the scenes sort of things that you can implement to make the encounter more balanced. Me personally, what I do is make the average hit points of the zombie 2 points above the average damage of the party. So it will on average take 2 attacks, but will almost never take 3 attacks to kill one of these creatures. You're level 1, your players have Firebolt, let's say, you give them 7 hit points. That way, an archer who's relatively good with a bow would cause about 4, 5, 6 points of damage per shot, and so it would take 2. The fighter with a sword might do a bit better and be able to cut them down with one swipe, but they're melee, so slightly different there. The idea is it allows for one attack to injure the zombie, the second attack to kill it, and then that second attack will be refunded, and they can hit another zombie, getting it down to half health for the next guy to chain and then cause damage. That sort of thing. That way, you make the zombies feel individually weak, and it feels a lot like you're cutting through a horde. It kind of makes the players feel a bit cooler by being able to take out numerous zombies, and it makes the encounter more balanced because you can put more zombies in, creating the sense of a horde, without completely destroying the player's ability to function. The third of these pieces of criteria is the idea of some sort of infection or poison within the zombies and their sort of demeanour. This is something I'd be cautious with. A single infection that can turn a player into a zombie is very much like a save or die sort of scenario, and I'm not a fan of them because it can feel like a single bit of bad luck can completely define the campaign and the life of your character rather than a tactical mistake. I'm a big fan of making tactics important to the game. I've got a couple of rules that I might introduce in a later video that enforce that idea, but I don't want a player's essentially whole character to be defined by a small collection of roles and nothing else. However, that doesn't stop the drama that you can create through an infection. But the drama you can get through an infection is quite intriguing. The adventure to go and find a cure, or how long can this person withhold the effects of zombieism before they eventually fall and the party has to put them out of their misery. I would probably not go for, if you're going for this sort of thing, I'd probably not go for a quick poison. World War Z, for example, had something like 12 seconds, if I seem to remember. Don't do that. If the drama is what you're going for, you can add stakes with that, okay? But it doesn't really add a lot of drama to the situation because the players will, the players will, as soon as you're infected, it's basically over. If, however, you have, let's say, a couple of weeks of infection before it turns, while that's not a lot of time, you can still work about going about getting a cure or finishing up your loose ends before the end. It's a brilliant way of ending a campaign or getting rid of a character in some sort of dramatic manner. So it's something worth considering, but not worth kind of putting too far, I would think. I don't think it adds too much to the zombies to just have them violent and aggressive. Something else to think about is having a variety of zombies, not just a single set type. When you're creating these encounters, having a singular type can often get boring, and though it can feel intense and it the repetition of the environment can be a real kind of downer onto the encounter, and so I would end up creating a number of variants, as it were. There are obviously the typical kind of there are the obvious ones that you can go for: the standard zombie, the fast but kind of fragile one, the slow but brutish. You know, those ones are work quite well. However, that's of course not a limitation to what you can do with these variations. I mean, Last of Us has a couple of ones that are quite interesting. The idea that the clicker, for example, with its heightened sense of hearing but almost removed sense of sight, would be an interesting one to incorporate. And the Blouter, the one that explodes on death, and the Stalker, the one that hunts you. You know, these ideas are interesting. I'll probably have a list of these at the end of the video, or once I've finished this segment, I'll say all the ones that come to my mind. But the thing to take into account when creating these varieties is, what does it tell you about the zombie? You know, maybe the standard zombie is recently infected. Okay, they're not particularly mutated or anything. They're just a standard within the last 2 weeks infection. You might have the brutish ones, or the clickers, as significantly longer, like a couple of months of infection to get to this level of infection. And then you might have, like, the Stalker is a specific mutant trait, a rare but powerful one that in certain blood types makes the victim more recipient to certain environments and faster and more animalistic. Or it might be that a Stalker is actually the mutated carcass of some sort of animal rather than human. By doing this, you can put a large quantity of these special types in a certain environment, and the players will get told a lot about the environment through the creatures there. I'm a big fan of not just presenting exposition, not just telling the party that this is an old city, one of the first infected. Instead, just have a bunch of brutes and clickers, essentially, to make it so that the players can understand that this place has been infected for a long time. It really sets up the setting and the environment without in a clean manner, I think, and it's worth considering. Now, a variety of creatures that you can choose from, or that came to my mind anyway, were standard, brutes, fast ones, hunters, ones that maybe explode in a poisonous gas on death, flailing or grappling ones that grapple you when you get within range or when you take an action, ones that summon other zombies through maybe a giant screech or some sort of horrid stench. All of these should have mechanics that should have mechanics that kind of symbolize the ideas that they're going for. The fast one should have an ability where they can dash as a bonus action, rather than just having increased speed. And the brute ones could have the standard D&D zombie idea where if they die, they instead get to make a save and not die. Now, the last thing to consider when making these zombie encounters is, how do you introduce them and what sort of encounters are going to take place with the zombies there. Because of the inherent aggressive nature of zombies and the ability to have so damn many that the players cannot deal with, it provides an opportunity to have encounters and situations that the players would not normally be able to get in. Usually players are very aggressive. They're attacking the goblin lair, or they're fighting the lord and his guards. However, there's very rare opportunities for the players to play defensively or have creatures attacking them in some other manner, because usually you don't have such an overwhelming amount that the players will either deal with all these creatures or try to. I mean, if you have 12 bandits attack the players will probably fight until the bandits are dead, just because they know there's a limited amount. However, if you were to have the swarming mechanic and have zombies coming in every round, the players will quickly come to awareness that they can't kill everything, and so they go about different objectives. I like to have zombies as more of a complication in some other encounter, some other sort of goal the players have in mind, be it rescuing an NPC or disabling some sort of artifact or finishing up a spell, the zombies can quite easily be there as a way to add complication to this. Plus it also creates one of those rare opportunities for a chase sequence. You know, the players now, after completing one activity or after getting caught within the zombie environment, are now just running for it, which is not something you get to do normally because, as I said, the players would usually just kill all the bandits or all the guards, you know, just because they don't see an infinite amount of them. Essentially, I feel like zombies can act as a way to a loose time limit, a time limit that can be extended by good play and reduced by bad play or poor luck. This sort of thing, it's just an interesting opportunity that is not common within the D&D environment and worth considering when you construct your encounters. Now, I could talk about turning and destroying undead within this environment, but I was planning on saving that sort of thing for a turning specific video. Now, I did state earlier that these creatures aren't necrotic creatures. Instead, or the way I think of them anyway, but instead they're kind of infections or parasites. But I would probably say turning in this situation still works against them, just because I still feel like there's some sort of negative energy that holds them together, and the cleric's turning would be a way of breaking that. Plus, I don't think clerics get enough opportunity to use the turning, and I don't care if it's a parasite. I'd let them go with it anyway. But yeah, I'll get into that in some other video down the line. But I think this video is better than the others once I finish editing anyway, because right now it says 35 minutes. There's a lot of time me just waiting, thinking, doing nothing. So I'll cut all that down. I will feel proud about what I've done, and I'll awkwardly sign off.